The history of economic analysis is vast and difficult to understand. I want to simply outline an alternative to how we view ourselves in relation to our state. When I discuss politics, I mean the human relationship to the economy. By economy, I mean the human relationship to their resources. By state, I mean any group of people who are politically and economically organized. For the purposes of this basic essay, a state can be as simple as a household or as complex as a country. The same is true for an economy. In my mind, a household that distributes groceries is as much an economy as a city. When I was writing this, I imagined resources being anything from a clay deposit along a riverbed to a computer chip. So resource here is also a vague but encompassing term. Rather than specific critiques or dissection, I want to provide a lens for viewing the human state and how that lens implies the possibility of an alternative. So that is the only goal of this essay, is to detail, basically to build a pair of glasses that we can put on, that we can then use to get a new perspective on the states that we have and how it is implied that we're going to be moving forward. That's really all. So, taking those pairs of glasses, when we see something like a household in a city, what that lens of glasses does is it strips everything away from those two except for what they have in common. So we put the pair of glasses on, we see the household, we see the city, then we strip everything away except for what they have in common. What they have in common is the goal of this essay, to explore what that actually is. And that commonness is what I call a state. So people who collaborate together make up a state, no matter if it's a household, no matter if it's a city. So when we talk about resources, it's the exact same thing. We're talking about anything that makes up an economy. So that could be clay in a riverbed or the computer chips, like I said. Because ultimately, very literally, they're made of the same basic resources. A lot of them are carbon, they have precious metals, all that stuff. So it's simply a matter of increasing the complexity of them. It's a pretty reductionist perspective, but I want to use reduction as a part of those glasses that we can put on, that we can use to observe these things and find out that they're actually really not that different. And that by finding what makes them in common, that they're not so different, we can use that as a stepping stool to reach over and to see a glimpse of the implications of the future. That's the mission of this essay. And greater, the party, the congregation as a whole, the mission for that is to apply this logic, apply this perspective, so that we can prepare ourselves through non-action for the future. So let's dissect it. Let's find out what exactly these things have in common. For example, with a household, a very simple household in, we'll say, the Midwest of America, we have inputs and we have outputs. We can say that they are literally bringing resources in and they are literally exporting resources. So for a household in America, that might look like, the breadwinner of family drives out to go to work and they bring home groceries. So there is an export of the person going to work, they're accumulating resources and they're bringing the resources home. That's really all we're talking about here. So the same is true for the city then. What is the city exporting? If we can find what the city is exporting and importing, then we can find where its resources have been allowed to be allocated. If we can find out where a city's resources have been allowed to be allocated, then we can find the stress points within the city. We can find the stress points that imply that possibility for a future conversion, a future transformation, a future transformation that allows the city to reduce its stress points. So when we talk about states that change, what we're talking about are cities that undergo these transformations where these stress points are reduced, where the stress points adapt to their materialistic conditions. So the same goes for resources. Resources are very delicate. Resources are made of material things that undergo a process by which they become useful. That's where labor is created. And so whether it's clay deposit on a riverbed to a computer chip, they both undergo a process of labor in which they are created to become useful. So when they're created to become useful, that essence plugs directly into the city's essence, into its stress points. So when a city gets a microchip, they suddenly, if you watch a time lapse of city growth, you can specifically chart, think of like the satellite images. When you see the satellite images of city growth, you can plot and predict and traject at what point new technology became available for them. Because say, if some new innovation is made with asphalt, then suddenly the roads will become much more expansive in relationship to that technological development. So we can say the exact same thing for houses and for apartments, that you can only have the apartment once the resources become available to create it. That's what we'll get into the next section. But essentially, the material has its own conditionality, its own gateways that have to be opened before these sets of transformations can occur. And once they occur, then their limitations, those stress points, are what define how they change. So finding those stress points, finding those points of contention, allow us those special pair of glasses where we can discern the path and the trajectory. And so this alternative possibility that I'm talking about is having a new pair of glasses, this next pair of glasses, this glass that has been forged by these transformations of these stress points within these material conditions that grant us a new type of discernment, this next step of discernment. So no longer are we looking at a growing line of trajectory and say, oh, the cities will get bigger, the towers will become taller, more people, more resources, more allocation, more economy, grow. What we're saying now is these stress points are stagnating. They're going to stall. When you're in an airplane and you stall, you're still facing upwards, but you're literally moving downwards. That's what we're talking about. But the people who have these glasses are the people who can point the nose down, who can guide the plane to the ground before it crashes. That is the gist of what I'm trying to get at. That's why it's useful for us to have this pair of glasses. So in my mind, a household that distributes groceries is as much an economy as a city. So the economy is just the action. The economy is many households within a city become a chart on the city planner's wall. They say like, oh, we surveyed 2,000 people within the city of Dayton, and we found that, this road needs work, or however they make those decisions, it doesn't quite matter. What matters is that those resources are made by the relationship between the stress point and the city. So the city knows its own limitations. It has to, because it needs to know how to go forward. It doesn't need to cognitively know that, but when you have these households, it's cells in a body. From a reductionist perspective, again, I acknowledge that. But for those cells to make up a tissue that makes up a body, they have to be in cohesion. They will be in cohesion no matter what, no matter how distressed that organism is, no matter how distressed or disconnected that city might be. This state is like a ghost that we all agree upon is true, that has possessed us to believe that it is true. And so because of that, it acts again then within us. That's the act of possession of these ghosts. So all of these states, these economies, these are all aspects of an inner working of a greater being that is this ghost. So for those people who have the perspective they want to keep moving forward, those people are possessed by the city's ghost. They're possessed by their city's ghost. And that ghost has its eyes on one goal. It does not care about its own impermanence. It does not care about the stress points. It is made up of those stress points, but it does not need to cognitively understand the stress points. It just goes and goes and goes. It's the exact same thing with the negation of the civilized ghost. With the wild ghost, it's also the same. It does not need to think about when to bloom each flower. It simply does it. This is non-action. This is not dual action. So as these ghosts possess us to harvest our resources, what we will find is that after so many clay deposits in a riverbed, we'll find ourselves with a computer chip. Well, after so many computer chips, we'll find ourselves again. What is the negation of the computer chip but the clay? Because the clay begot the computer chip. So, these principles are the limbs. They act differently, but they're all limbs. They all help this creature move. They help these ghosts reproduce and exist and permeate and possess. So understanding the limbs, understanding the powers that these ghosts have, identifying the parts, bringing it into the conscious mind so that we can cognitively talk about it. We're doing this kind of book club thing. That will be the tool, the necessary structure that we use to create this analysis, to basically forge these lenses that we're going to put over our eyes so that we can see and discern and make known and act upon this transitionary state. And the very fact that we can even begin that discernment means that it's ready to exist, that this ghost is trying to move in. That's us. That's who this congregation is. That's who we bear witness to, is the coming of this ghost, where it rears its head where once it was not, so to speak. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is we're laying forward the foundations of what we could call the stress of the city, which means its guidelines where it needs to correct itself. We're laying forward the resources, the economy, the state, the politics, all of those things. We will flesh those out in the future. Thank you for watching.